Well, good morning, everyone. It is the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started today. I know there's still some people hopping on, but welcome to our fourth installment of our volunteer engagement webinar series on the 12 elements of effective volunteer management. Today, we'll be discussing screening and placement with our guest, Cheryl Bachelor Boothe. Cheryl is the Volunteer Services Recruitment Specialist at the Kansas and Oklahoma region of the American Red Cross, and we are thrilled to have Cheryl with us today. So if in the chat you could drop your name, your organization, and your location, that would be wonderful. It's so nice to see where everyone is from.
What is going on?
And while you are doing that, I will just go over quickly some of our objectives today. We will review the 12 elements of effective volunteer management briefly, and then introduce our fourth element, screening and placement. And then we'll discuss effective practices with our guest, Cheryl Bachelor Boothe, at the end, with time for questions and then commission announcements before we leave. The 12 elements of volunteer engagement are the essential practices that make a volunteer program most effective and sustainable. Strategically planning your volunteer program will help garner organizational support and create a culture of positive volunteerism throughout the agency. This also helps us develop mission-centered programs that are fundamental to the agency's operations. Well-written position descriptions set the expectations for both the volunteer and for the agency. Creating great job descriptions proactively addresses many of the issues that could come up during or in reference to supervision or management on down the road. Great recruitment plans are strategic and utilize compelling messaging and a variety of platforms to reach your target audience to fulfill the agency's volunteer needs. And great recruitment doesn't just stop at posting the positions or advertising. It incorporates a focus on retention as well, which we'll talk about a little bit on down the road. And today we'll discuss screening and placement. Our June webinar will combine both orientation and training. We'll talk about supervision in July, recognition and acknowledgement in August, coordination and communication in September, record keeping and reporting in October, evaluation in November, and then finally volunteer and staff relations in December. So mark your calendars for those topics that are of particular interest to you. And if you missed a topic, you can find recordings of all our previous webinars on our website. So when we do screening and placement well, we really set ourselves and our volunteers up for success. We have a great guest today, and I want to maximize our time with Cheryl. So we'll briefly discuss what effective practices look like, and then dive into our experts' knowledge and expertise. I know that many organizations have intentional and really necessary high barrier screening processes to keep clients, staff, and community members safe, especially agencies that are working in healthcare or with high vulnerable populations. If your agency has high barrier questions in the screening or as part of a screening process, you know what those are and you know that they're necessary. So for those of you who must remain in compliance with the high barrier screen, please consider our conversation today as it applies to your pre-screened and qualified volunteers. I'd love to move the conversation around screening past a tool for weeding out people or for finding our best matches. Finding a great match is very important. It's a very important piece of the puzzle, and screening can end there, but I encourage you to consider screening as a way to find more and find out more. When we approach screening from a place of curiosity and with an expansion focused and capacity building mindset, we open ourselves up for new possibilities that we have not yet imagined or even realized. Great screening asks questions that identify a potential volunteer's unique skills and talents, professional experience, passion projects, and community investments or connections. This is an opportunity to move beyond increasing our volunteer numbers and moving towards building up or building out our volunteer network in a three-dimensional way. So we want to have a conversation with our potential volunteers about their skills, their interests, what they bring to the table. We also want to know what other community initiatives they're involved in so that we can identify potential opportunities for collaboration within our community in the future. Maybe there are opportunities for the potential volunteers' advocacy work or interest in another area to intersect with the work that your agency does. Maybe their professional history lends itself to skill-based volunteerism, or maybe you discover a skill they'd like to learn and practice at your agency with your support. There are many ways we can attempt to gather this information. My suggestion is to make a list of the talking points and to have or to initiate a screening as a conversation whenever that's possible. If your team is at capacity and that's just not possible to do, this could be a great opportunity to build a volunteer team to help with this process. In my work as a leader of volunteers, I have repeatedly found that if you leave someone with a checklist or even a short answer form to fill out, to collect this information, you will miss a significant amount of data every time. Of course, over the course of a volunteer's life or relationship with your organization, the service with you, you'll find out more about them. But if we make an effort to find out as much as we can about our volunteers and place them accordingly, we set ourselves up for success and everyone involved and position ourselves to expand capacity to fulfill our mission. In addition to untapped potential, you might also discover that your volunteer is a better fit for another program within your organization, or one that is not the position that they applied for or not what they had in mind when they walked in the door. If that's something that you identify during this conversation, you have a great opportunity to pivot and tell them about other roles that you see them thriving in within your organization. And placement doesn't end here. It's important to have check-ins and evaluations worked into your program strategy that Sarah talked about in January to make sure that the placement is still working for the volunteer. Maybe after some time in the role, they'd like to try something new or build a new skill. Or maybe after some time with your organization and learning about your mission, they see opportunity that was missed 6 or 12 months ago when we initially went through this process. The possibilities are absolutely endless here. So I'd love to bring Cheryl on now. And as I mentioned, she is the Volunteer Services Recruitment Specialist with the Kansas-Oklahoma region of the American Red Cross. Cheryl is an expert in volunteer management and implements effective screening and placement practices across her service area. Cheryl, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Haley, for inviting me. It's absolutely wonderful to hear you guys talk about how this can impact our organizations on a long-term scale, and it starts at the very beginning, for sure. A little bit about me. I've been with the American Red Cross for almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years this September, so it's quickly coming. Unfortunately, it's like, woo, where did the year go already? So yeah, I've been doing everything from recruitment to helping everyone identify what different positions are available in what part of the region. So my region is Kansas and Oklahoma, but I focus mostly on 3/4 of Kansas. So all the way from Douglas County, straight down to the corner, down near Garden City, Dodge, all the way back up and over. So that's just kind of a little bit of overview of where I cover and what I cover.
That is a huge service area.
It is.
So how many volunteers, ballpark figure, do you see annually?
So incoming for region wise, we have an intake referral. This is the easiest way for me to explain this. We have a referral process where it goes over to our lines of service, and I can kind of get into this process. Is over 1,000 a year. So we have about 1,300 that went through this last year. Again, it depends on what chapter, what city, what area. It's a wide amount. I'd say up in our chapter, it usually ranks into 300s. On a good year. But that's, again, that's referral. That doesn't count how many people have actually started their application or we had those conversations. You can times that by like 12, 15 more multiple times, because of where we go and who we talk to. And we always have to find that one passionate person that, yes, I want in. And then maybe they don't know where they want to go, et cetera. And that's where we have those conversations. And the first screening step is just finding those people, having those conversations, and see where we go from there.
Sure. And I'd love to hear more about what your screening process looks like.
Absolutely. So, like I said, as a recruiter, they come in first. That's the conversation. Granted, they can just jump on the website, and those are ones we don't usually see until after they've actually started the process more than halfway through. And that's when we have those conversations. So, once they come in, they go on our online availability and they do an application. So, the application is, like I said, it's strictly all online. So they have to be a little bit tech savvy to be able to do that. I do verbally walk them through if that's what they would like to do, just because there can be lots and lots of buttons, and sometimes lots of pages and a lot of pop-ups. So it just depends on what area they're going. But they do the application online. We do the automatic background check. And then depending on the position, we run MVRs, the motor vehicle background checks on those too. And then once they go to there, we go to our screening team. Or engagement screening is what we call them. So it's a kind of a double check. Did that position that you wanted match the one that went through the system? And so we're just double checking on our end, but also on their end. Oh, it's been at least 2 weeks, because it does take about 2 weeks for us to get them through that process alone on our end of the house. But so they have that conversation, make sure that it's the right position. Yay, yes, it is. And then we pass them from there onto our lines of service. So we have different programs within Red Cross, different departments. And once they pass, again, that last screening section, they go over to our lines of service, and they actually have another interview, just to make sure that, oh yeah, this position's still available. Maybe we can maneuver over here. Oh, this new one came up. So they have those purposeful conversations of what drives that person. So maybe, yes, the right department, but maybe that position, maybe it's something else sparks their interest just a little bit more where they would prefer to go. So that's where we have a couple of different lines where they could have those discussions of what piques their interest, what drives their passion, what would they like to do.
Absolutely. And I want to circle back to that conversation piece of placement. But I'm wondering, so we talked about a few of the benefits of having really effective or great screening in place, the benefits of it. So what have you all specifically seen on your team that has been helpful?
It depends on which step they are in. But for instance, if at the front line as a recruiter, when we have those high need positions that we know that we always have those at the top of our list to discuss, to see where, if any of those pique their interest first. But then we also talk about what drew them to Red Cross. That's actually my very first question. Always, what drew you to actually come over to the table to talk to me, to say, ooh, I recognize that. Let me have a conversation with you. What brought you over to have that talk? So when it comes to offering those main high need positions, I have a variety. So really our disaster one is our high need right now. And we have 3 that go hand in hand with each other, and that's the easiest way to explain it. So I talk about it in function. So first thing first, they have availability to be a virtual volunteer. So that gives them that option. If they don't want to do in person, if they prefer to be on the phone, maybe not talk to clients directly, but someone behind the scenes, we have a dispatcher. So that's virtual. And the next one that happens, they contact our action team. They're the ones that go out to the families that were affected by, for example, home fires we respond to. So that's another high need, but it's an in-person. It gives them that option. And then we have another one that's recovery. So like a caseworker, but still has to have conversations on the phone, another virtual opportunity, but conversations with the clients. So we have behind the scenes, we have in person up front, and then we have it an upfront but virtual on the phone. So that gives them a variety of options right then and there, but they're all high need positions on our end. So offering them different opportunities, kind of, oh, I like this, but I don't like this part. Do you have something that's in between? It kind of lets them kind of sort through as well, which allows them that flexibility and more ownership to what they would like to do.
So it sounds like you're really able to utilize the screening process as a recruitment tool in a sense for positions that are obviously high need or positions that a volunteer might not know about just from, their initial interaction.
Exactly. And we do have a lot of positions where if they look online, it may not even be listed. And so that's where our recruiters and our screeners, so we actually train both. So like I said, I will separate the term recruiter and screener, although it's screening from the very beginning, day one. So we actually train the ones that follow up after they've done the application process. We fill them in on those high need positions if they haven't had that discussion already with the volunteer, if that makes sense. So like if the recruiter had that conversation, they don't usually need to worry about that. They just make sure it matches. If they didn't and they went directly, the people coming in wanting to volunteer goes directly into the website, then they have that conversation. So we do train them on that end as well, so they can still have that purposeful conversation.
Okay, that makes so much sense. And I apologize for this question because it's not one that I told you I was going to ask you, but I know you're going to have an answer for it, and I want to
Okay,
hear what
go
you
for
think.
it.
So, for our agencies today that don't have a screening process in place and are going to think about writing a screening, what are some of the questions that you think are like absolutely have to be incorporated for the benefit of the agency?
Besides asking, and I obviously will keep repeating, the passion is the key, what brought them to us, ask that question first. But then also, what is your availability? What does your availability look like to you? So
Mm.
that's another question. So they may be available during the days, and they may have newly retired, but maybe they do want to keep some of those afternoons open. So maybe they're only available in the mornings. Wanting to know what they want availability wise is also really key, and setting up those expectations for some of those positions that may require certain time frames, certain availabilities, certain, maybe they need to have the car and maybe they don't, if that makes sense. So those are, what else, some of the questions. Oh, age is actually, I always forget that, but that's a key one. I forget it because I usually see them, so I can kind of judge. But if they're younger, we definitely have limitations if they're under 18. So youth is a whole nother ball game that I'm sure I could talk a couple hours on if you'd like to later. But yeah, so age on that part is one. Are they over 18? That's key. So time availability, age, time frame. Do they have access to computer internet? That's actually really key for a majority of our positions, in general, because even if you're going in person, you're going to have to plug in that information as soon as you get done, into our software system. So we have a specialized software system that we train how to get on, but they still need to find a computer to do that on, if that makes sense. Now, if you have the availability in your location, by all means, let them know this is available here at this time, this place. And a lot of them do like to use resources that you have available. Other things to ask usually are, what are things that you would like to grow in, if they already have an idea, but sometimes we wait for that question. So it may not be the initial intake, but we do follow-ups 30, 60, 90, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, touch base to make sure that they feel connected and they feel like they're on the right growth pattern, for training, for wherever spot. Where usually it's still training within the 30 days at least, and then 60, how does it feel that you're doing the position now, and things like that. So asking them later, how does it feel? What would you like to see to continue to do? So that's definitely some of the key questions to ask.
I definitely want to come back to placement evaluation, but I'm wondering how many times or how common it is for you to realize during screening that a volunteer might be a better fit for another role.
I think that depends on the person that I'm talking to. So there have been a good chunk of times where they're like, ooh, I want to be a blood donor ambassador. So that is someone that just, I don't want to say just, because they're key to running blood drives. They check in people as they arrive. So they have to be tech savvy. They have to have a good 6-hour time frame to sit and hang out for the day, to be able to do that. They can't come for like 2 hours and head out. So if they ask for that because they have that, but they don't know that they like the conversation that happens, right? They like the helping more. So you can always mention about the casework part of some other positions, different lines of service, because maybe they decide, I like the conversation, but that's what I like about it. I want more of that, more in-person conversation. So if it's in-person conversation, that's another position. That's when you go out to that family, connect to that family in person. So it could kind of, and maybe the blood donor ambassador position isn't available in that location. So that's key for me as well. Some cities have some availabilities that may be listed online, some do not, that are still listed online. So we have to have those conversations as well. So if there is something that pops up that we think is a better fit for where they are and their availability, what drives them, I'll just flat out ask, hey, this is also available. Or maybe it's not even listed online and I know of something else that's around the corner. I will say, hey, this isn't listed, but what do you think of this? And it gets them excited. Oh, you saved something for me. So we have that conversation. And if it's like, not so much, we're like, okay, we'll just go back to it and see what else fits, right? We just go back and forth and have those honest conversations about availability and passion, what they want.
I think it's so important to know how you're going to frame that pivot, right? Like if you know that there's a possibility that any volunteer, of course, might be a better fit in another place, it's not what they had their heart set on. So how do you talked a little bit about it, but can we make that conversation easier and more palatable for our volunteers, especially if they're kind of pigeonholed themselves into what they're going to be doing for our organization?
Absolutely. Honestly, I get them to talk more. I start asking questions about whatever it is we were talking to that they seem to get more excited about. As they veer more excitable, I'm like, great. And then I just follow that until I have an ability to connect whatever was making them excited to a position that we actually have. And usually if I could tie it in that way, then they're like, oh, yes, yes, please. It's like, okay. So it's a lot easier transition. So letting them talk through it a little bit. Now, granted, if they're like, I don't know, I really wanted this one. Um, and if it's not available, just honesty, letting them know it's not available. And then giving them options. So, but still allowing them to pick, if that makes sense. Don't just say, oh, this one, this one, this one, and just shoving it right there. You let them kind of sort through not just the positions, but their emotions towards those positions.
So maybe something like, hey, that's not open right now, but I do have these other options that I think you'd be a great candidate for.
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Am I headed in the right
Exactly.
direction?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And then, of course, if there's more connecting to more community things, sometimes I have positions that aren't listed that are with our executive directors. I'll bring those up. And if that they're like, oh, yes, that sounds more, tell me more about that. And then I'll tell them more about that. So, yes, absolutely. It's kind of the option angle is definitely being able to talk about different availabilities.
Yeah, and I think keeping a curiosity mindset, right, is so important because we want to find a place where a volunteer is going to be successful with us and we want them to be with our organization. So just continuing to have an open mind and approach their personalities and skills with curiosity is so important to me. And I love that you are so willing to find that for somebody. I think that's really, really incredible. Okay, so you talked about circling back on 60 days, 90 days, and did you say a 30 as well on
Yeah.
placement evaluation?
Yep.
Yeah. So what are you looking for? What kind of questions are you asking at that point?
Bear with me because I do talk to that team that does that, but we actually have a national thing that
Oh,
rolls out
sure.
and spits it out. We also do annual surveys too.
That's a great
A
idea.
bigger picture conversation, if you think of it that way. How did this last year go? How, and it's since it's comes from nationals, they kind of plug it in as here's your chance to talk about maybe some of your direct managers and supervisors that normally would be asking your 30, 60, 90. But if you're not comfortable with that, here's a chance for you to do so. So we allow that. Now, granted, it is anonymous, but for the surveys, but we get the feedback and we're able to tweak what we need to and have those purposeful conversations. The 30, 60, 90, usually it is like the first one usually is about training, right? They're still continuing training or they're finishing up training. So we ask about training. How did it go? Do you feel connected? Do you feel like you need a little more? If so, would you like to revisit some of that training in certain areas? It's all those kind of conversations. The 60 days usually is, how do you feel settled within the position? And then I think the 90s is, how is it going? So it's training, settling, feeling it out, and then kind of how they feel about the whole experience and the position they're currently holding. Now, we also don't pigeonhole them into one position. If they hear about another position, I always tell them this at the very beginning as well, or they get so excited about 2 or 3 different positions. We always want to start them with one, preferably. Just so they can get their feet wet and make sure that this is the area they want to be. Now, we do have different programs, so they can always switch programs. If they start in disaster, but they want to go to services to the armed forces where we help veterans and families and active duty members, yes, they can do both. They don't have to stay to even one program. So we make sure that they know that they have that availability to add, whether it be adding training into that position or adding another position itself. Now, we do have some positions that work hand in hand with each other. Like at the very beginning, when I spoke about the 3 that are function, they can actually take all 3 of those positions if they want eventually. Usually they don't, they prefer one versus the other. But as long as they can switch it up within the activity. So if we have, let's say someone had a home fire, the person that did the response in person cannot be the same person that does the recovery part of following up with that family. So we have a lot of people that actually take both of those positions and then switch them with the different clients. So it's not always the same. So yeah, offering that availability at the very end, would you like to add more? Have you heard? It gives them a time to talk about what they've heard about and from different volunteers and say, hey, I've heard about XYZ. Can we try a little bit of that? Yeah, absolutely. So we look into further training and further positions if they would like to.
It sounds like you've got a little bit of built-in cross training in a way for your volunteers, which is really nice for them to be able to get, some insight on different departments or different positions. So I did not talk about this during my portion of the webinar, but I'm wondering if you solicit feedback or circle back with the staff who are working with volunteers as part of their kind of placement evaluation or follow-up for those critical time periods that you've identified as well.
That's a very good question. So us as the intake volunteer services side of the house, right, where all the volunteers come in first, we see the trends of the volunteers, but we also hear the needs constantly from the staff. So we have monthly meetings with our chapters, which is, smaller breakdown. Usually it's a couple of counties, but as you guys know, at the very beginning, mine is 3/4 of Kansas, so it covers quite a bit, but it's still the same staff that cover it as well. So we still have that conversation saying, okay, we can pull numbers, we can pull reports, it's all connected on our big old system, but we need to have that conversation. What we see the need is like 4, but where are those 4 and what exactly are those areas? Because every area is going to be a little bit different if you cover, such a wide space. Different towns are different. A different need of kind of the same position, if that makes sense. A big city metro like in Wichita would have a different need than in like Coffeyville. So that kind of thing. Did I kind of cover what is the question? I feel like I'm going to circle about that, but
yeah, I'm curious how we can build, and I know some agencies do this on a more regular basis and not necessarily just at those milestones, but just highlighting the need or reminding everyone of your ability to talk to your staff as well and seek their input on a volunteer's placement. When I've been working in direct service positions in the past, sometimes as the volunteer manager, the leader of the volunteer program, I don't always hear from staff about their interactions or how they feel like the position is going on the ground, and realize there's definitely a need sometimes to solicit that information before we need to have a hard conversation with a volunteer.
Got you. Okay, so yes, that's kind of a totally different side of the house when it comes to ongoing cultivation of the volunteers and how they may fit. So that's kind of also why we have those different conversations as they're coming in different sections, because we can get the general gist and more of the passion of the volunteer. But as it gets down to the nitty gritty of the department, and the department has that interview right away at the very beginning. So if they already know, and maybe it doesn't within that 36, that's another reason we do the 30, 60, 90. We also have that opportunity at that point for the staff to say, it's not quite working. Let's see how maybe we can offer them this. And sometimes they will call us in volunteer services and say, as they were coming in, how do you feel about XYZ? Usually we don't have we have the detailed conversations, but getting to know them on how they produce the work for that position isn't something we're really knowledgeable of, because we don't see them on a daily basis, especially if they're virtual or something to that degree. The department does. But the department having those conversations at the 30, 60, 90 are definitely imperative. And yeah, they can absolutely offer different positions to them within their department. If they want to go outside of the department, then it comes back to volunteer services. And we actually re-engage with a conversation saying, okay, this didn't feel comfortable to you. Let's talk about why. Let's go to whatever positions, and we'll talk it through to see even if staying with the organization is something they'd like to do, or whether or not they just say, okay, it's not for me. And that's okay. It's a hard here to get, but it allows for growth for your organization locally. And you can let them know that, remind them that thank you for your input. This is definitely going to help others in the long run. Even because sometimes I feel a little guilty saying, yeah, it's just not my fit, but that's okay. They let them know that it's for growth all the way around.
And a point I'd like to bring up around placement, and I'll wrap this up so that we can ask questions. We can get questions from our participants today. But if a volunteer is not a good fit for your agency, that doesn't mean they aren't a good fit for other agencies. And I would love for us to move towards a place of community philanthropy where we are looking out for each other and learning what the needs are of other agencies so that we can make appropriate referrals. Like that would be a really wonderful scenario for each community in Kansas that we service, to help them foster those partnerships and collaborative efforts around their volunteer placement.
I love that. I would love that so much. I actually a lot of times refer people, because I can have that initial conversation, right? Because I'm out there at the very, very front, where I already know whatever they're asking for isn't maybe something we can do, or they want a quick turnaround intake. And we don't offer like large project group things very often. We're trying to change that, but that's, maybe that's a little, hey, keep an eye out for. But it's still going to be a bit for us to design those. But I send them to United Way, because United Ways usually have that listing of a volunteer opportunities on their page, or you can actually have a conversation with their staff. I usually find out that their staff are more knowledgeable than the website. So they kind of know who in your local community could go where. So I do refer a lot of people, not a lot, but a good chunk, especially youth, when I get them in, because we don't have a lot of availability for youth to do something in person, and that's what they want. And so I send them to United Way usually. So.
That's a fantastic idea. I love that so much. So I'd like to take some time to open this up for questions. If you want to drop anything in the chat or come off mute, you're welcome to do that as well, and ask your question for either Cheryl or I.
Hey, Cheryl.
Hi.
Hey, I am in the process of putting together what we're going to do for our AmeriCorps group, because we're going to get one this year.
Nice.
And so I'm really interested in that 30, 60, 90 that you started talking about. Could you do you have a little bit more detail that you could share about how, like it's not just one question, but like how do you work through the questions on those 30, 60, 90?
I wish I had more detail on that, just because I don't implement the 30, 60, 90, but I know those conversations there. I would say, what would you like to form your own questions? I would say, what would I like to know as someone just starting fresh, new into your group, or those dire questions that you want to know from someone that's just started, right? Like, ooh, how did the onboarding work for you? How was that comfortable? Did the training fulfill what you wanted it to fulfill? Kind of that kind of situation. I wish I could give you like a list, like these are the exact questions that we ask, but I don't have that, unfortunately. But I would say being diligent on that 30, 60, 90. Like, you could probably do less if you wanted to, but we don't want to inhibit the growth of the volunteer as well in between those time frames. So I think that's key too, is letting them time to breathe through the training. But now, granted, I guess I'd never mentioned, we do get together monthly, no matter what, all volunteers in each department. Sometimes they have breakouts with different positions, so they can have more in-depth jargon, if you will, conversations that pertain per position. So we keep them connected as much as possible. Sorry, Lenore, I don't know if that actually answered the 30, 60, 90 detail question.
Oh,
But
that was helpful. That was helpful.
Okay, good.
Thank
I'm
you
like,
so much.
Absolutely. I would definitely stick to the training. How do you feel? Was it purposeful? Because that's the feedback you're wanting. Whatever feedback you want, kind of switch it around to the question of, okay, did this fulfill what you needed? And then, of course, what your organization needs to kind of know about. Those are always really good.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I think a thing too to keep in mind when you are writing questions for those benchmarks or those milestones, regardless of the actual time frame, is to keep those questions open-ended as best you can. Sometimes you do need to have a yes or no question, of course, but to offer space for them to really share their thoughts and feelings, and to ask not leading questions, but kind of specific questions. So what support do you need to make you feel more comfortable or competent at your position? And then let them, tell you if there is additional training or resources or support. So to keep that in mind when you are building out those surveys.
Oh, that's very good to know. Thank you.
I am not seeing any more questions on the chats, but I'll give you all another couple moments if you have anything that you'd like to ask Cheryl before we move on to some commission announcements. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for your time. That was so helpful. Really appreciate you being here.
Absolutely. Anytime, Haley.
The Kansas Volunteer Commission exists to empower all Kansans to meet community need through service, and our primary role is to provide resources and leadership to support local initiatives to tackle community needs. As the commission, we direct effective national service programs and provide resources and training to advance volunteerism, mentoring, and civic engagement. You can go to www.canserve.ksde.org to find out more about our programs and resources, including our 2023 webinar series. We have 3 great webinar series this year. Registration for all 3 can be found on our website. Our social justice capacity building mini grant opened May 1st, and it will close on June 1st. This grant is designed to help volunteer and mentor organizations build capacity around social justice specifically. The commission strives to increase power, representation, and agency among historically marginalized communities. This mini grant focuses on initiatives or projects that support both social justice and one of the following areas: access, inclusion, and participation in program services and opportunities, empowerment of individuals and communities to voice what is most important to them, action to recognize injustice and navigate differences of power, privilege, and oppression. Projects for this grant could look like, but are certainly not limited to, coalition building and mobilizing, residents to take action on community level change, board and staff training and development like anti-bias trainings, leadership programs that develop and identify new community leaders, technology advancements for campaign development, and projects that raise awareness of racial justice, LGBTQIA, and disability rights, and community arts projects that focus on social justice, and activities that foster inclusive communities of belonging. There are any number of things that you could get funding for this grant, so please take a look at our website to see a full list of ideas that we'd like to share with you. Applications, again, are due on June 1st, and we hope to see what cool projects you're working on with your communities. The Give Back Kansas Challenge is currently underway and will run through June 9th. This challenge engages Kansans in employer-supported volunteering, both during and outside the workday. You can find more information at the link provided in the flyer here, or go to canserve.ksde.org and then click on the Take Action banner. The next volunteer engagement webinar will be on orientation and training. That is the second Tuesday in June. And then stay connected with us. You can visit our website, sign up for our monthly newsletter by emailing volunteer@ksde.org, and invite us to present to other groups that might benefit from the Commission's resources. We'd love to know about tabling events, speak at your conferences, and provide educational opportunities across the state. And of course, please follow us on social media. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We will see you on the second Tuesday in June for orientation and training. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.